This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 254 of a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid-state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many, many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's at geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders, today on the show, I am honored to have Michael King. He's the founder and CEO of TEAM.COACH, and he is an executive and business leadership coach. One of the cool things that we'll talk about today is some things that work and don't work when it comes to reviews. We'll talk about just the general approach to how to be effective as a team leader and what are some of the things that we can do. Michael's going to bring some of his own experiences and all the clients that he's worked with and helped out to make this interview awesome and to hopefully give us some good value going forward. With all that being said, Michael, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. How's it going, John?
I'm doing good. If you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about kind of how you got to where you are in your career and what it is that you're working on today, just so we can have some context for the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. So my path is a little bit of an, maybe a little bit unorthodox. I guess I bump into guys quite often that have had similar paths as I have, but I grew up in the Midwest. So I live in Omaha, Nebraska. I have 3 amazing kids. I have an amazing wife. I've been married 25 years. And close to 25 years. So hopefully that doesn't age me too much, but we started off, my career path in pastoral ministry. So I started off being kind of like the music director, went to Bible college, got my undergrad in church music and all those things. And I've always been kind of like this left brain and right brain leader. So working with lead pastors and within the organization of really helping build systems and structures in order to make that specific thing work. Transitioned into being an executive pastor. So I've been coaching leaders in and outside the church for the last couple decades, but my life took a pretty drastic, sharp turn back at the very end of 2017. There were multiple things that were happening inside my life and inside just my heart, but also just things that were happening within the organization to where I had to do some really hard reflecting and going, okay, something here is not right. I'm going to assume that it's me. I'm going to go ahead and go back to school to figure out how to learn at bigger levels. And so that's when I started my deep dive into my master's program and learning more about organizational leadership and executive coaching, those things. And yeah, so the rest is kind of history. The platform kind of made itself to where I went from coaching leaders within the church to coaching close to 600 churches globally through an organization I was the executive director for. And then as big brands and larger team environments came out in the enterprise type of space, I really found a really great fit. And I love what I get to do. I'm a passionate leader that helps executives find their best pace, but also their best team. And so that's kind of where we're at today. We started my company, T.E.A.M.S, which is also my domain name as well. So if you want to check anything out that we're doing, you just go to my website there. But we launched my company in summer of 2018, so June of 2018. And to even my surprise, during COVID, it was the fastest growing year that we've ever had as a company.
Wow.
So been incredible.
Well, that's awesome. And when I think back on it, kind of church leadership kind of got me more focused on leadership because I was a new manager, I guess, at the time, and I got a volunteer. So I go to Elevation Church in Charlotte, and I got a leadership position on the volunteer group there. And I remember there was a Friday. This is more than 10 years ago. And our pastor, Pastor Furtick, used to do these like Friday lunch with leaders kind of thing, where we could ask him any question. And I was going through a period of time where I had a lot of turnover on my team, and I remember asking just one question. I said, so, like, how do you deal with turnover? Like, especially when it's potentially your fault, because people typically leave bad bosses, and how do you deal with the stress of like turnover in general? And have you had to experience that? And I remember he told me one thing. He's like, some people are, God puts in there to be like scaffolding, and they're extremely necessary to build the building that you're building, but they're also necessary to leave in order to have a finished product. And I mean, that really stuck with me as a way to kind of like realize that it's okay for people to leave. It's okay to have turnover. And sometimes, like, for people to be effective, they have to go through that life cycle of leaving. And so yeah, it kind of wraps back to a similar type approach that you have.
Yeah, and that's a great perspective, actually. I love elevation and love Stephen Furtick. He's brilliant.
So if you don't mind, just tell me a little bit, because one of the things that piqued my interest when the pitch for you coming on the show kind of came across my desk was you mentioned something about like how 360 reviews just kind of don't work. And that's one of the things that I was really interested in, because I've been a part of 360 reviews. I don't use them today, but I've been a part of them on both sides, and yeah, they've been around for a while. I was curious of what your take is on that, and what should we be doing?
Our team's methodology was really built out of some pain points, and so there's a lot of different things that organizations will do to try to push forward productivity. And one of the things that I think gets overlooked quite often is just the idea of your engagement factors with your team. One of the most valuable pieces of information that you'll ever get from your team member, by the way, is actually what they think of you. Think about some of those transitions that you might have had, John, from people that have left your team. If they would have turned the blinker on a year before they left, letting you know that something was off, you might have been able to do something a little bit differently about it. And and I do think that when it comes to senior leaders within organizations, the number one job that we actually have is not the products that we produce, but it's the people that we produce. And it's so easy, especially in a competitive market space, to get the eye off of the bullseye. And the bullseye, just to be incredibly clear, it's the people that we produce. It's not necessarily just the products and services, right? So, so the idea behind the idea of this big clickbait statement of 360-degree reviews don't work. Well, that's a very generalized statement. And the reality is if you have accurate data, and if you have a good leader that's a healthy leader that really wants to make sure that they're emotionally and psychologically invested in their team, they actually might be able to get some really good feedback from a 360 review. Feedback mechanisms, just in general, they're very, very, very important. And so if you don't have a feedback mechanism within your organization, you've already lost the game.
Yeah.
So where I'm coming from with 360 reviews is it's a generality, but unfortunately it's the way that a significant number of the 360 review process programs have been built. And I don't know if you know the history of the 360 review.
I don't know.
It's the first historical documentation of the 360 review actually goes all the way back to World War II. And it was used by the German army to assess the performance of their senior officers within their military. And it was very subjective. And so now in the enterprise space, in the corporate space, these things started to take place in the 50s. And they've kind of evolved along the way. And there's actually several different organizations out there now that I'm a huge fan of that use the 360 review to actually influence culture and to build the right culture. And so, but because their programs are built around more specific attributes of the 360 review, these guys are doing a killer job with it. So I'm not an enemy of the 360 review, but what I will tell you this is that based on the way that the majority of the people use it, it's problematic. And what that is if you're only using the 360 review to 1 to 2 times a year to actually find out subjective opinions of what other people think about the employees that you serve, you've already lost. You're only checking a box. And that's really the biggest issue, that when I start working with a team and I find out what type of feedback mechanisms they have in place, this thing pops up quite often to where we find out when I ask the question of like, okay, well, tell me a little bit about your feedback mechanisms. And especially if there's a high level of turnover, and which, by the way, I work with some industries that have an incredibly high turnover rate. And so feedback mechanisms, this is kind of where we start with quite a few of the things, just because it's like, man, if you're bumping, 100% turnover rate year after year, and you're not actually taking into consideration the emotional quotient of your team, then there's a bigger problem going on here. So, so that's a longer answer to your short question, but that's kind of the issue of why the 360 doesn't necessarily work, is that it's designed to only really get a pulse of what's actually going on a kind of like an annual basis in general.
Yeah, and even that, like when I look back on it at places where I've worked before, the 360 was kind of reserved for like, oh crap, you're in trouble. Put you on you have to do a 360 review, or the opposite of that, like, hey, we want to promote you into a leadership position, so we're going to do a 360 review. It wasn't like a regular thing. I know for me, like as a leader, most of my feedback comes from just ongoing one-on-ones and regular one-on-ones with the team. How would you recommend someone go about, especially if you're like managing a smaller team of, let's say, 10 to 12, how would you go about getting that regular important feedback?
Just without, we developed our own system through the T.E.A.M.S methodology. And so even through our app, you can download it in the App Store. It's a free app. But it feeds into some executive coaching programs as well. But, that middle level of the T.E.A.M.S methodology. So we talk about targets, engagements, action, momentum, and synergy. But engagement, I want to talk about engagement specifically because it's really more about the cadence and the information and the safety and the security of your team. Transparent leadership or authentic leadership is really defined by the idea that you are an ethical leader that leads with transparency, and you're hearing and you're listening for feedback from your team, and you're implementing things that are appropriate based on the said feedback, right? And so taking all that into consideration, our engagement pattern is that we like to make sure that we're collecting data as often as possible. So even on a weekly basis, for example, through our app, we're able to ask team members on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your engagement with your direct report this week? And it's a general question, but it allows us to collect data. And so on a monthly basis, I can go to one of my senior leaders and say, hey, I just want to let you know your engagement number for this week is you're averaging 7.9, and or this month you're averaging 7.9 with everybody on your team. And so it gives us some leading and lagging indicators, but it gives us something to talk about. And I think that really is the thing that is probably more important than anything, is that if you're a leader of an organization or a leader of a team and you're not emotionally intelligent, if you're not emotionally invested in your team, this is just a blind spot, because sometimes these are things that are hard to measure, but guess what? You can actually measure culture. And so the things that you care about the most are the things that you're going to make visible. So let's make it about things that are actually moving your team forward, opposed to the things that are holding you back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think and sometimes it's hard to be emotionally in tune to your team when you're also responsible for delivering projects, on time. How do we balance that as leaders?
I don't have the answer for everything on this, and I'm not even going to pretend that I do. But I think, again, if there's, if just for lack of a better term, if there's a will, there's a way. And, I think just you being a senior leader or a leader of a team in general, if you have a desire to actually be emotionally invested in your team, regardless of how busy you are, you're going to figure it out. And, and I think that's why we embraced some technology things early on with our coaching programs, is because we do understand that people get really busy. And so if you are an intentional leader, and if you do care about your team, well, give them an opportunity to fill out a survey that's going to take them 15 seconds every week, so you can actually get the data, so you can actually have a little bit of a blinker that's turned on within your leadership grid to let you know, man, there's some issues that are going on your team. So you need to have some harder conversations, or maybe even just lead a little bit differently. So that's what I'd say. But the world that we live in is really complicated right now. Mm-hmm. And so the KPIs that our leaders are dealing with, and the things that are being measured, it's hard. So so I would just say that in general is that if you do have a heart for your team, let them know and try to figure it out. Be creative with ways that you can be in the emotional mix of your team.
Yeah, I've always found like it's difficult sometimes because people are so different, and I'll have some people on my team that will appreciate like the morning, good morning, how are you doing? And other people would be like, leave me alone, let me just get to work. I don't, like I haven't got coffee yet. Don't tell me good morning. And you have that kind of mix of people that some people like just want to be left alone. They just want to do their job, and other people want this interaction. They want like team lunches. They want things, involvement. How do you balance the two?
Really, again, um, I guess I would have just asked you the question, John, what do you want to create?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the thing, is that the difference between us being reactionary leaders versus progressive visionary leaders is that I have to understand that my role as an executive coach is to come alongside high level leaders and make sure that I'm helping their vision come to life like it's never has before.
Yeah.
And part of that vision has to do with cultural things within their team. And reactionary leaders react to the environment that you just literally said. So I would just say, if you build it, they will come. Quoting Wayne's World from whatever, right? And I think that's really important just to do that, just because, you can't have the tail wagging the dog on this per se. But if you want an environment of approachability, likability, teachability, inclusivity, well, then you need to be able to make sure that you're putting some constructs in place to be able to champion those values within your team. Now, you might have some people eventually that are on the outskirts that aren't going to engage in that. You can't force that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's important that that as a senior leader, that you're gonna attract whatever you make visible. So eventually, over a period of time, hopefully you're attracting the people that are aligned with the values that you're making visible as a leader. It doesn't always work perfect, but I know that as I've developed leaders in larger enterprise spaces and also just in nonprofit church spaces, is that the temperament, the character, the chemistry, the capacity, and even the competency of the senior leader, those things are the things that end up getting noticed by your team, and those are the things that make themselves visible.
How much of that have you seen, like, are the same, like, between the for-profit and the not-for-profit kind of industries? Like, how much of the leadership skills are pretty much the same either way?
Language can be different.
Yeah.
It can. I think that was one of the things that I wanted to educate myself on, was that I was starting to get invited to coach in spaces that weren't church spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And, and that's one of the difficult things right now, is that, I am a believer. I'm a Christian, and, I even lead worship in churches at times, and I'm a recording artist as my hobby. And, and so, but it can get very, very easy to get lost in some of the language that we use inside the church, and people on the outside of the church have no idea what we're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Or they hear church language, and because they might have been hurt by the church in the past, they immediately discredit anything that comes out of your mouth because you sound like a church leader. So the differences between the two spaces, really, systems and structures and strategies, if a system works, a system works. If a strategy works, it works. The difference really, though, is just that nonprofit and church organizations have a tendency to be a little bit more complicated because it's not a black and white world. It's easier for us to make very fast decisions in the enterprise space, especially when there's money attached to things,
Yeah.
KPIs per se. If there's cash, like I was just, one of the things that I have experience working with in the Omaha area is working with a few of the car dealerships, auto franchise type of things. And I wish I could tell you that on a week-to-week basis, it's like sometimes I don't even know the rooms I walk into. There's such a fast turnover because there's dollars attached to people's performance. The church world, that's not really the case. We're working with people sometimes that we don't necessarily get to choose, especially in the volunteer capacities. And the people that are getting paid to be there, it's a lot more complicated to remove a staff person that doesn't necessarily reflect the values or is healthy for the team than it is to sometimes keep them.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've worked, in an organization that's had for-profit and not in ministries, kind of related. And I found like basically it seems like you're right, the terminology is kind of the difference. And also, sometimes I don't know I don't know how I'm going to say this to be nice. Well, I guess I don't have to be nice. Sometimes the willingness to face the hard facts and to let people go, like you're talking about, is sometimes we give a lot more chances sometimes in the not-for-profit areas than we would maybe in business sense. And maybe
Yeah,
that's not the right way of putting it, but that's one way that I've seen.
well, yeah, I mean, and I think that I was just with a client this morning, actually right before we hopped on this call, and he's a brilliant church leader, and his pain point, he was literally just looking right at me and just saying, Mike, I have to make a change. And, so when we started going back through and just reverse engineering that decision-making process and how he's going to do it, so, what does that conversation look like? Who needs to be involved in the conversation? And I could literally feel him approaching the subject with anxiety because of the relational expense that could be involved in it,
Yeah.
some of the politicizing expense that could be involved in it. And man, it's unfortunate, but I do like coaching in the church space right now post COVID because everybody has to reinvent themselves. And so it's an incredibly exciting space to be in right now. And so I'm glad to be on this side of the fence during this season. But I will say that my heart does go out to church leaders that have to make some massive changes, because sometimes our boards and our congregations, they make it really, really hard for us to do simple things.
Yeah, I have to say, like, I guess I couldn't imagine like the difficulties that churches had to go through. I know even with our church, which already had a good online presence, when COVID happened and you kind of had to shut the doors and go online, and now it's kind of an expectation for people to be able to, stream and go in or whatever, have the flexibility to do whatever you want at that time. And it's been awesome to kind of see some of the innovations that came out of it. Like, before we didn't have like a kids presence online, and now there's not just a kids presence, there's a, 3-year-old to kindergarten kids presence, and then a YouTube channel just for, first grade to fifth grade, and then one for the youth, and then the regular service is also streamed online. So it's like you have this innovations that have happened that are now great, because if my kid's quarantining, hey, we can go upstairs and turn on the channel. But it's one of those things that churches had to kind of evolve and say, look, we've got to reach a different people, or a different audience of people with different requirements now than what we had before. And sometimes that requires a significant change in the way you think things through.
Well, think about this too. And so you're talking about church space, and I'm talking about everywhere else right now in this moment, because, as we headed into COVID, it was almost as if somebody just went over and flipped a switch on the wall and just instantly made every single organization aware that they now had to have two completely separate organizations. They had to have their digital organization and their brick and mortar organization.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just a church thing. It was literally like one of the clients that I work with is Aveda beauty salons. And so working with different in just different salons and stylist type space of understanding, like, okay, we actually have to have an online strategy in order for us to make a dent, for us to continue to communicate. And here's the thing that's probably just as hard on that, and specifically because this is you specifically target into kind of this technology space, right?
Right.
Is I think that the awareness that if you are a leader right now, and you're trying to lead exactly the same way that you did before COVID, you're going to fail right now. And that's hard, because you do have these two organizations. And in some organizations, I would even call it the three. Here are the three organizations that exist within larger teams, is that you have your remote culture, you have your digital culture, and then you have your brick and mortar culture. And how do those things interact? You literally need to have operational systems and strategies that are significantly different from each other in order to make sure that those things all work, but they all need to point to the common vision and the common goal. And that is hard.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, you're absolutely right. And there's, even just the way, like, I used to conduct meetings and, talk to people and just stop by people's desk. Now that it's sometimes you're in a hybrid situation and you have the one or two people that are remote. You have to be intentional about reaching out to them, because that serendipitous stop by and talk doesn't happen anymore. And you may go an entire week without even conversing with the person. So, as a leader, you kind of have to change your strategy sometimes in that communication path.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Tell me a little bit about this team's approach to achieving the goals that we've kind of hit on and talked about a little bit. But let's go into let's break it down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, excuse me. I think I'm an executive coach. So specifically, in the name of my company's T.E.A.M.S. because I work with senior leaders, C-suite leaders and their teams to be able to produce results like they've never seen before. And in order for that to happen, first and foremost is that a senior leader has to be willing to look in the mirror and go, okay, is this going to be a teachable season? If I haven't been teachable, what do I need to do to be able to see things that I haven't seen before? And I think that is the benefit of having an executive coach, is just to be able to go, okay, how can I grow? And will you help me see things that I've never seen before? Or my blind spots per se.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love that. But part of that with working with teams are where the amazing stories are created. And I love that. I love the idea that whoever tells the best story wins. And so what can I do as an executive coach to make sure that my teams are winning, my C-suite leaders, my VPs, my CEOs, that they're winning, they're seeing things come to life like they've never had before. So we wrote this about 3 years ago, and it's been this constant work in progress, but it's the team's methodology of coaching. And man, it's just really served us really well, and I'm very proud of it. So just to kind of break it down, here are the 5 letters that kind of go into this acronym, but it's the T stands for targets. So it doesn't matter whether you're a team or whether you're the leader of the team. We're going to identify what's the one significant target or the goal that you're shooting for this week. Engagement is the E. So engagement from 3 different perspectives. We're going to keep track and help you keep track to be a little bit more self-aware of how are you engaging with your direct report, how are you engaging with your team, and how are you engaging with your audience. Those are really big things for a leader to grow in self-awareness. A is action. What is the one thing that you're doing this week that is helping you move towards your target? Identify it, name it. If you need to have one of our Wednesday wake ups, we have a Wednesday wake up in our app, to where it'll pop back up and let you know, hey, by the way, this is what you committed to this week. This is your action step. So make sure you get it done. And then momentum. We look at momentum as the M just a little bit differently than other people look at momentum. But momentum for us isn't about what are some more things that you can do to move faster, but it's more along the lines of, what do I need to remove from my path that is slowing me down so I can go faster? Do you feel empowered to identify those things, and do you feel empowered to make decisions and changes along the way? That's a really big deal. We can circle back on that one in a bit, and then S stands for synergy. Is this, as a leader, John, I would ask you every single week for you to document, like, okay, what are the things that are going really well within your role and within your position? What have you succeeded at this week, and how are you rewarding yourself? Let's document that. Let's create a culture that says it's okay for us to document our wins and for us to celebrate the big wins and the small wins along the way. So we have that available in digital format through our app, and also just a basic paper form for people to be able to run meetings and for them to kind of use it as almost like an EOS type system. And it's so there's that. It served us well.
Awesome. So let's go back to that momentum you mentioned, to circle back around to that. Explain that a little bit further. Let's dig in a little bit about removing some of those impediments and some of the things that you may find are hindering that momentum.
This is a big deal, and I don't know about you, but typically what I find is that when a team member is disengaged, when there's high turnover on a team, or even attracting high-level talent to your team, the term empowerment is a big deal. And in fact, I was actually on site with a client last week, and they were interviewing an incredibly high-level talent for an executive director position. And so it was very unique that I happened to be on site, and I got to interview this guy with them. And so I asked them, some of your typical interview questions, that I like to ask, what is the thing that you do better than anybody else? I want to know how you're going to answer that question. What are some things that you feel like you've failed at in the past that you've learned from? But then I asked this question. I said, if an opportunity was made available to you to be a part of this organization, what would it take for you to say yes? And do you know what his answer was?
No. What?
Brilliant answer. He said this. He said, I want to know if the organization is ready to truly empower me, or if they're going to hold my hand along the way and make my life miserable. And really, it's like, I appreciated his honesty, and this leader did have enough of a track record to where I did not take that as being prideful or arrogant. I took this as being confident of him saying, I've had enough experience in this space, and I've heard enough about this organization to where there's enough of a yellow flag being raised of saying, hey, I could probably make a big difference in this organization, but are they actually really willing to make some changes? Because if they just want me just to get the things done that they think they should get done, I'm not the guy. So on that momentum piece here, I would say, if I could put an E there and talk about empowerment all day long, man, I would do that. Because, I've been in situations to where empowerment was lacking, and it made my life miserable. And so when we talk about momentum, of identifying the things that are slowing you down, and having the authority to make a decision about those things, and even possibly remove them or adapt them as you see fit as a leader. That one single question, I would even just challenge your listeners right now, do a little bit of an audit with your team on that right now. Like, ask that single question. Are you able to identify the things that are getting in the way of success for you here, or the results? And do you feel like you actually have the authority to make changes if necessary? I remember I was actually on a staff. This was several years ago, and I found myself being in that executive director type of seat, so like the number 2 within the organization. But it had become a family work environment to where everybody that was surrounding me was either a really, really close friend of my boss. They were his son, they were his son-in-law, they were his daughter, they were his nieces and nephews. And I just felt like I was stuck. And, eventually at the end of the day, these were some major considerations as far as some of the decisions that I would be making in my future, as far as whether or not I felt like I could make the biggest difference there, or whether I can make a bigger difference elsewhere. So again, momentum, empowerment. Are you able to identify the things that are slowing you down? I think that's really significant. What do you think?
No, I agree 100%. I was thinking about how the word empowerment, I used to hate that word, because I always felt like when someone would say, I'm going to empower you with something, it always came with a but. Like, I'm going to empower you with this, but if the purchase is over X number of dollars, you have to come check with me, or I'm going to empower you with this, but run it by me before you send it out, and it's almost like, well, if you empower me, then let me take the risk, let me just do it, and don't make me have to come to you for everything. And I can go back to, one of the things when I was transforming my team back from when I was a sucky manager and I had all these people like quitting to becoming a team where we didn't have turnover in 3 years, from a software development group, and, our productivity went through the roof. One of the things that I did is I implemented like a service project. We started out quarterly, and then we ended up moving it to every month. And we were spending a half day on Fridays once a month and going and doing volunteer work. Now, if I would have ran that by my boss before just doing it, he would have said, absolutely not. You're not going to take your entire team and, miss 4 hours, on a Friday, every fourth Friday. And also I implemented 10% time. So like they had 1 day a week where they could work on anything they wanted. Mm-hmm. That wasn't what we were typically working on. And we did that. And if I would have ran that by them, just from a business standpoint, they would have said, no, we're not going to do that. But just by doing it and then showing the results and then saying, well, we're doing these things, once the train starts moving, it's really hard to stop it, But I felt like if he was, true empowerment is where you let people kind of take that risk and move and get out there. But every time it's always been, the phrase has come to me, it's always been empowerment, and that but has always just like kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So I think you're right. I think we're agreeing and saying the same thing, but it's just one of those, I guess, the terminology of how you phrase it, making sure that when you do empower your team, you not only give them the authority, but give them the means to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I personally, I invest in self-leadership for myself. So I pay an executive coach, and so I meet with him every week. And then I also pay a counselor, a therapist, and just for psychological and emotional health. And I think it's been a game changer, by the way. So, but I bring this up because one of the things that my counselor told me, he said that anytime that somebody says the word "but" in a sentence, it actually negates anything that was actually said before it. So the thing that you just said, yeah, I'm going to empower you, but well, as soon as you get to the "but" in that sentence, it's like, I'm not really truly empowering you.
Yeah, and that's almost always the way it works. It's like, yeah, we'll give you the authority to do this project, but if your expenses are going to go over this amount, then let us know, or run it by us first. And it's like, well, sometimes in order to do the right thing, I've got to have that freedom to fail. And when you take that away, it changes your mind on how you want to approach the project.
Oh, that's amazing. That's amazing.
So, I mean, that's just my take on that approach. But you're right. I think whenever someone says "but," it kind of just throws the whole thing away. We were going through agile training with our team just recently, and we were talking about one of the videos. The guy said it was entitled. I think the title of the video was "Scrum But." He's like, whenever people say we do Scrum but we don't do this part, or we do Scrum but we don't do this part, then guess what? You're not doing it. Or we're agile but we also do this kind of methodology. Well, then you're not agile. And I think you're absolutely right. Whenever you put that "but" in that sentence, it kind of negates everything that was before that.
Yeah, that's been my experience with that as well. So it's been being able to navigate through what true empowerment looks like, and being able to take a risk as a senior leader to understand, like, the best thing that you can do sometimes is for you to be able to just let go of control and just see what happens. I loved what you said, by the way, when you were talking about that you allot 10% of people's time to be able to do whatever they want to do.
Yeah.
I think one of those things that, just moving into the future, flexibility needs to be one of our foundational values. If you're not flexible, you're actually not going to attract high level talent. And embracing this idea too, and I don't know if you ever thought about it this way, John, but the positions that you've created for your team, you've built those positions to your level of understanding of what you feel like you need. By allowing people to have some of that exploratory energy, you're actually going in exploratory bandwidth, even. You're actually going to create opportunities to where you're going to discover some hidden talents that are on your team that you didn't even know existed in the first place, and you might not have even known that you needed them.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think you're absolutely right. And I can speak a little bit, like when it comes to that, giving teams or people the freedom to work on other things. I can go back to, more than that, probably like 7 or 8 years ago. We were letting our team kind of just work on. So I managed a web and mobile development team. So we were building websites and mobile apps for our company. And this is a company with 300,000 plus, it's like a utility company. So like 300,000 people that subscribe to our utilities. And, we mailed them typically paper bills that they would, pay, either pay online or wherever. And without prompting from anybody, one of our developers during his 10% time decided to build a little pop-up when you logged in, if you weren't paperless, to just pop up and say, would you like to go green? Yes or no. And if you clicked yes, you're paperless. If you click no, we remind them in 60 days, 90 days, or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he built it, and I said, hey, this looks great. Let's implement it. And after the first year, the company saved $80,000 in printing cost. And not to imagine how much paper and trees we saved, But just something like that comes out of just a little bit of time that didn't have to go through the formal train, getting markings approval and going through it. Just let's just do this and spend your own time doing it, and let's put it out there and see the result. And the results of that, the CEO actually honored him with a little award at the end of the year for innovation, for coming up with a great idea. And that inspired the entire company to start doing things like that, to come up with ideas and try to innovate. And it's amazing the little things that can come out of working on something that you're not told to do.
Well, and that's where, just kind of leaning into what you just said right there, during people are looking at this season of the workforce as kind of like being the great resignation. You've probably heard that before. High level talent's hard to come by. And so the things that keep high level talent are, of course, things like this, like empowerment and coming up with new ideas, being innovative in the space, and acknowledging people for really good work that they've done. So when even just kind of coming back to the story that you just shared, and just like how, they opened up this idea for somebody to be able to chase down, and how it saved 80,000. Would you say $80,000 it saved by the end of the year?
Yeah, just in the first year. And those are reoccurring revenues, so it's,
Yeah. And, I think that's a really great example of just like, hey, here's the thing right now. I don't think it's called necessarily the Great Resignation. I think it's called the Great Reckoning. And because we live in a space now where, didn't that sound like a movie trailer, by the way?
It did, yeah.
We live in a world. But our world exists in which high-level talent are now actually starting to say, this is what it takes to keep us. This is the thing that we want to do. This is the types of teams that we want to be a part of. You have to be able to trust your team. And, and the people that don't deserve trust, of course, they prove that over a period of time. But, the workforce of tomorrow is a workforce that's been empowered in a way that looks completely different than the way they have been in the past. And that's just something we have to take into consideration. It's these new ideas, embracing innovation and ingenuity, as well as identifying the things that we're doing that aren't working, that we consistently still keep doing anyway, and then allowing people, giving some people empowerment to be able to stop those things as well.
Yeah, it amazes me how people don't want to stop doing things that make no sense, whatever, just because they've always done it. Yeah.
Well,
I remember I was talking to somebody when I got this new role about like some reports that they did, and I was asking, I was like, so who views these reports? I don't know. It's like, well, let's look at the stats, and nobody had viewed them. And I said, so why are you doing these reports if nobody's looking at them? Well, in case they decide they want to look at them, they're here. Like nobody's looked at this in over a year, so why do them? Like, what's the point?
Well, the point is that sometimes we fall more in love with our systems and strategies than we actually love the results that they produce.
That's 100% true.
And yeah, and so sometimes leaders are willing to go down with the ship on this. And I was just working with a client this morning, and they, this has been something where it's been a hard turn into where it's like I kind of feel like I was working with the CEO. We've had that coach moment to where we kind of had to do mutual headlocks, just a little bit. So healthy tension and a healthy pushback, but asking this question, what got you here is what's going to keep you here. You've invented these really, really slick systems and strategies that when they're on paper, if they were producing results, you'd be considered like Elon Musk level genius. You know what I mean? Or crazy, whichever side of the coin you want to look on that. But because they're not actually producing anything, all it looks like is that you're an OCD leader. So what do you want to be known for? And man, just seeing the leader kind of embracing the idea that maybe he might have to change some things up. He didn't make the decision today, but we have a meeting set for next Thursday in which he's going to give me a plan as far as what he feels like could work better. And he's the leader, so he has to own it. But getting that place to where you are looking at that and going, maybe my outcomes aren't as flashy as my systems and my strategies are. So maybe I need to adapt. Maybe I need to change. That's a big deal. It really is.
Yeah, 100%. So, Michael, man, I've really enjoyed the conversation. How can people find out more about you, your mobile app, and your website, and connect with you to learn more about the things that you're working on?
Oh man, thanks for asking. I'm actually giving my cell phone number and and also my website. And please follow me on all socials. So my social through Facebook is Teams.COACH, on Twitter, Michael King Jr. And Instagram, it's Teams.COACH as well. And then my website, it's Teams.COACH. So it's all pretty simple. Are you kind of seeing a theme there?
Yeah.
But I remember reading a book by Bob Goff, and at the very end of the book, it's called Love Does. He actually gives out his cell phone number, and I thought, this guy's crazy. This is nuts. But then I was just like, you know what? I want to be that executive coach. I don't want anybody listening to this feel like they're going to get caught in a click funnel. We're all in this together. And I want people to know, like, they can reach out to me if they have a leadership question. I'm all about a relationship, and I want to see people win. So that's why I give out my cell phone number. And so I know it's a little bit unorthodox, but it is what it is. But it's my cell phone number is area code 763-245-4984. And I will promise you, like, you text me a question, or if you are in the Omaha area, or if I'm in your area, I will buy you a cup of coffee. So
Awesome. All right. Well, I'll link that up in the show notes as well. You're the first guest, I think, to ever give out their cell phone numbers. That's unique and pretty awesome. But thanks, Michael, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
John, you're great. Thank you so much.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.